do want to bring you a greeting, a hearty hello from Spring River Baptist Association. How many of you have ever heard of Spring River Baptist Association, by show of hands? Several of you have. I won't take a poll or anything to see what the percentage is, but I do say thank you for being a great supporter. This church, First Baptist, is a faithful member of Spring River, and I have the privilege of being called the Director of Missions there. We're about three things. I'll very quickly tell you this, and we'll get right into the message today. Spring River is about pastoral encouragement, church equipment, and I don't mean copiers and pianos. I mean equipping churches for ministry, and then mission engagement, whether that's evangelism or mission work all the way around the world. So those three things, you can tell that a preacher put those together because they all start with E, and so you can remember that kind of thing, but that's what the association is about. And so we say thank you for helping us do that work. We're about 50 churches strong, and so you have some partners in this community and a couple of other communities close by that you have that are praying for you. I can tell you personally, there are churches in the association that periodically will have First Baptist Joplin in their bulletin or on the screen saying, hey, we are praying for you guys. And so that really breaks my heart and blesses my heart all at the same time. I'm thankful that churches can partner together for the cause of Christ. So this today, Jamie asked me if I would preach, and normally this is the family Sunday, where you talk about family kind of matters. And so I do know next week you've got a round table about family finances and that sort of thing. And so I put this together called Biblical Stuff About Family Finances. And Jamie did tell me I can preach about money. And so that's sometimes not high on the list that pastors want to do. But here we are. We're going to talk about biblical stuff, about family finances. Before we get there, you're in Luke chapter 12. That's where we're going to be. Anybody got a $10 bill? How many of you got a $10 bill? I'm not going to ask you for it. Don't worry. You get to keep it. I know you say, hey, that's crazy. I bring those offering plates back. How many of you do have a $10 bill? You think you got one in your wallet or your purse, that you could easily get to? Now, here's something interesting. Fun fact, I guess we'll say. If you have that $10 bill and you don't owe more than that, now what I mean by this is you don't have, like if your mortgage is $50,000 and you have $20,000 to your name, you really don't own that $10 bill, okay? Now, if you have more than whatever you owe and you have that $10 bill, let me get this straightened out just a second. There we go. You have more than that $10 bill, then you have that in wealth. If you have that $10 bill, you are richer than 84% of the world. Okay, so let that sink in for just a second. Now, if we cut that down to just Americans, it's much less than that. But if you have that $10 bill in wealth, you are richer than 84% of the world. That's what statistics would tell you. You might find some that go higher than that or some a little bit lower, but that seems to be the average of that thing. So keep that in mind as we talk about this biblical stuff for family finances. In Luke chapter 12, we're going to think about this in three ways. It says this at verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbiter over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness." Your translation may say greed in there. All types of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentiful. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will those then be? So ends the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So let's consider this again in three aspects, if you will, about family finances. First of all, a financial plan is needed. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, this was probably a Pharisee. If you look back in the previous chapter, Jesus is criticizing the Pharisees. He is insulting the Pharisees. He's doing all he can to bring them into the conversation. So he says, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said, who made me a judge over you? So there was a financial plan in mind here, but this has to do probably with something like a will. You can look back in Deuteronomy chapter 21 and chapter 25, and you would see that the eldest sibling would get twice as much as everybody else, as the other siblings, in the inheritance. And so maybe this guy is coming forward because he didn't like the financial plan that was put in place. So that'd be like for me, my older sister, she'd get $40 and I'd get $20. That's literally what we would inherit. And so it's kind of a joke amongst our family, but she would get twice as much as I would. So maybe he's coming to Jesus and asking, truly, this is not right. There are just some things not in line here. But you can't argue with what the Old Testament put in place, and Jesus wasn't going to argue with him either. The way I want you to consider this about having a plan in place, for some of you, you might have to consider this, do I have a will in place? God has blessed many of us with more than those $10 bills that we were talking about earlier. You have a variety of things that your kids may or may not fight over. Or they may just haul in a dumpster and say, well, Mom loved that, and there it goes. I don't know, but do you have a plan in place that says what's going to happen? Unfortunately, I've seen far too many families squabble over who gets the fine china and who doesn't. And so a will might be something you need to consider today. I would also tell you this, in your will, have you thought about how you can help First Baptist Joplin? Or have you thought about how you can help your favorite not-for-profit organization? Or have you thought about how you can invest this in a greater area than just saying, well, kids, here it all is. What can I do with a kingdom mindset that's prevalent? How have I been able to help give away some of these things for God's cause? Most importantly, though, a will may not be on your radar. And that's okay if it's not. Here's what all of us do need to consider, though. Do we have in our plan a written down budget? You're getting ready to have a financial peace opportunity to go through a class. Used to be, when it was more of a cash-based society, you would have envelopes that they would say, put your rent in here, put your mortgage in here, put your utilities here, and then you fill all those envelopes. And you still can do that, by the way. It's a little more difficult because we put things on our charge cards and all these different things. But do you have a plan that's written down that says, here's the budget that me and my family are going to try to live by? And if don't just shake your head, and say, well, yeah, I've got a plan. It's all right up here. All right? I know it. I know it very well. I've got it memorized. Well, look what happens in Luke chapter 14 and verse 28. It says, for which of you desiring to build a tower doesn't first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he's laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. I would tell you just from one parable that a written down budget is biblical. I would say it's not only just biblical, it's a good idea. All right, God understands these sort of things. You can write out that budget. If I ever were to have, as a pastor, a couple come in, there were a couple of issues that usually they were struggling with. These are the two most prevalent. One would be intimacy, or the second would be finances. When they come in and say, Pastor, we're struggling, we got all these financial things that are happening, I would ask them, well, show me, since you guys are being this honest with me, you've come in asking for my help, show me your family budget. Well, you mean you want me to write it down? I've got it right here. I said, yes, write it down. I'm giving you the paper and here's a pen right now. Write this thing down. And usually they could not. And so I'm encouraging you today, counting the cost is a good thing. All right, just like this parable says, you sit down and check the cost first. So your financial plan, I would recommend it be on paper, that it would be visible. It may be something you have to talk about at the dinner table even from time to time. Now Jesus, if we go back to our parable in Luke chapter 12, he addresses this and says, no, I'm not going to be judge in that case. Jesus is ultimately going to be the judge, but at this point, he's not going to be judge over a petty dispute. That was something that was a civil matter, and Jesus wasn't going to touch this at that time. I'm telling you that he has far bigger things that he came to do. finances was nothing. Jesus didn't care. It says he didn't have a home, he didn't have a place to lay his head, and yet he knew exactly why God sent him. And so I pause at this point and I ask you to take a break from thinking about your budget that you may or may not have written down and think about something even more important. When you stand before God, is he going to say, well done, or go away? And the only reason that he would say, well done, is because Christ died for your sin. And you have come to that realization that you cannot pay for it, you cannot by good works buy it. The only reason that you can stand before God and him say, well done, good and faithful servant, is because you have come to the realization and the acknowledgement that Jesus died for your sin. On top of that, you repent of those sins and say, God, forgive me. You see, maybe it turned you off automatically when I said biblical stuff about family finances. You might have tuned me out immediately, but hear this one thing. If you walk out of this room today not knowing and not having a relationship with Jesus Christ, I pray for you. My heart breaks for you. And I would do anything I could to help you come to that fact and come to that realization, just like I have in my own life. That's the most important thing, that we can come to the fact and come to this relationship with him through today. So that petty dispute was a financial thing. Jesus knew what he was doing. Now be smart about this. When you're making this family budget, do not include bank robbery in that budget. Don't count on that. This guy in Ohio, I read about this just this year on June 4th. This guy in Ohio goes into his bank and he gives the teller, the note, says, I've got a gun here in my bag. Give me all the money in your counter. And she does. And he says, by the way, I know you've got this ATM over here. I want money out of that too. And she says, well, sir, that ATM only works if I have a driver's license. And so you know what the guy does, reaches in his pocket, pulls out his driver's license, gives that to her. She says, thank you very much. She quickly gets his name, his address. She got most of the driver's license number committed to memory and said, okay, thank you, sir. And he goes out of the bank with money, yes. But within a matter of 10 days, the police quickly found him, had the whole matter put to rest. He was in jail. So do not, I tell you that story so that you do not count on bank robbery as part of your financial plan. Okay? You cannot go out of here and say, well, that preacher said I got to have a budget and I got to go rob a bank to make it happen. That is not the way it is. Here's number 2. Not only is a financial plan needed, number 2, evaluate ownership. Let's consider who owns everything. It says at verse 16, and he told them a parable saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. Well, it makes me beg this question. It looks like he's rich already. He's been blessed by God already, and there was a great crop that was happening. It makes me want to answer this question. Who created the ground that he was working with? Yes, he may have been smart. He may have been a hard worker. He may have done all of that. But who actually created this system that he was in? Well, look back at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. Many of you have this committed to memory. In the beginning, who? God. He created the heavens and the earth. This earth is large, right? It is everywhere. It's everything around us. God created all of these things. I'm thankful that we serve a creative God. There are some beautiful places in this world. We could spend a lot of time and talk about all of the beautiful places that you have gone and seen. And that's wonderful. I hope it adds to your relationship with this creative God. But understand and realize He is the owner of everything. Another question then comes to my mind, well, why was man put here? If God's creative, if He can do all this stuff, and I think He did create, in this 6-day time span. I just take the Bible literally wherever I can. And I think He was that creative in that amount of time. It makes the miracle and the wonder of God even more so. Well, why man then? Why were we put here? Look no further than Genesis chapter 2, Verse 15 says, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Work is not a bad word. Are you looking forward to, well, you probably don't got to go to your job tomorrow, right? Most of you probably off tomorrow. But Tuesday, you may have to go back around to that workplace, or you might have to go back to school. You know, it's not a bad word to learn, to put in energy. It's not a bad thing. He could have done anything he wanted. I know that. But he chose to put the man in the garden. The Hebrew word for Eden literally can mean delight. They were in this garden of delight, and God wanted them to tend it. I would say God is consistent from start to finish. What he starts in Genesis chapter 1, he does complete by the end, but the same kind of principles apply. He still wants us to work and take care. I'm not anti-environmental anything. I like what God has given us. I'm not trying to be crazy or anything, or I want you to be wise as well, but these things are around us for God's blessing. So he's blessed us in this way. So we're here to work. Everything you must realize then is God's possession. Everything you have. You drove up here in a vehicle probably, or if you walked, look at your shoes. Didn't you have some shoes to carry you here? Or a bicycle? Took our son to college it's been a few weeks ago now. And one of the things he took was his bicycle. We're like, hey, that's great. Saves me on my charge card from gas to put in his car. And he gets exercise along with it. Some don't realize everything is a blessing. We have a son-in-law, had a bicycle at the same college, and it was stolen. I tell you, these crazy Baptists, Southwest Baptist University, you'd think, hey, it's safe school, right? You don't got to lock your bicycle up out on campus. No. So you tell them, hey, it's all God's possession, right? Some of these things can be replaced. Some of this stuff, don't get too tied to this. It's all God's. Everything is. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10. It says, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Now this, when you see this term fullness, don't take this as I got to be a hoarder. You've seen those shows on television where you can't literally get into the home because of all the stuff we're keeping. So that's not what this is saying. God is in possession of everything. It's His, literally. So we consider our financial plan. Is it written down? We think about ownership. Do I really own anything or not? Yes, I know your name may be on the title, but it's all God's anyways. And so that leads us to this. We must examine our attitude. Ownership and attitude must go together. This says at verse 17, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. There I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this night your soul will be required of you. As we examine our attitude, this guy in this parable has the right question. He says, what will I do? And I would say you need to be asking this same kind of question as you examine your own attitude towards the things, towards the money, the possessions we have. What will I do? That is a good question. But you must understand it does not involve all of these I statements. See what he says. He says, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. I will store all my grain. I will say to my soul, eat, drink, and be merry. The I statements are quite overwhelming. If that is your attitude, I encourage you to look deep within. Is your attitude, what do I do with my stuff? Again, going back to ownership, it's God's anyways. What will I do? Will I build and build and build? Do I want more and more and more? No, the idea should be, how can I give. That's the right answer. That's where we are. How can I provide for others? How can I give back to God's kingdom? Here's why I get excited about this. We can give of ourselves physically. As a matter of fact, in about a week, I'll take a group of pastors. We're going to Aguas Calientes, Mexico. That's the state. So we're going to the state of hot water. I don't know if it's hot or not, but we're going there. We're going to do an eyeglass clinic ministry. We'll do a 3-day clinic. We'll see anywhere from 600 to 1,000 people. And it's rather important because I know we can go down to Walmart. If you need a new set of readers, they're kind of fuzzy. You can go down there, $10 or less. You can pick out a set and come back home and you're able to read again. For some reason in Mexico, it's just not the case. They don't have that accessibility to even things like eyeglasses. And so we'll provide eyeglasses for every participant that comes through. As long as they need them, we do an eye evaluation and then send them on their way. But before they go, they have to go through the final station of the clinic, which is the gospel presentation. We partner with 2 churches that are there in the local community. El Llano is the name of the town we're going to. And there will be 2 churches that send evangelists, if you want to call them that. And when they leave the clinic, everyone will absolutely hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And so we're giving to them physically so that their eyes can be open spiritually. The churches we're partnering with, they're hoping to start 2 brand new churches out of this one clinic. We've seen great success with this kind of thing because the churches follow up then with each of the participants, and we've seen churches literally started and growing because of giving to their needs physically. We must have the right idea, though. It does cost something. It costs for us to go. It costs to provide the glasses. It costs for the training. The ministry that we are going with, there's a $10,000 machine that you examine the eyes with, and they have actually had that stolen at one time in the past. And so, can you imagine this? Figure this out. This is a machine they'll stick on your eyes, measures the distance between your eyes. It can give you a readout. If some of you are technical, you understand that with that eye ministry thing. It's a $10,000 machine. Someone stole it out of the vehicle. Can you imagine when they opened that thing up and said, "What is this thing?" They had no idea what they were getting when they stole it. I know that for a fact. But here again, it's God's stuff. Every bit of it is God's, and it's for His kingdom. And so do we fret about that? Well, there was a little fretting going on, yes, but we just ask God to provide. And so you examine this attitude. How can I provide for others? We will go physically and give to them. You have done this in your own community. I know there are apartment complexes around where you have physically gone, you have physically given in order to bring people to this realization of who Christ is and show them God's love. The money is not the problem. I would tell you this, wealth is not the problem. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, it says this, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." It's not the money itself, but it's that love. Again, I take you back to a rather comical story. A girl in 2012 goes into Cornerstone Bank in Waco, Nebraska. She robs the bank. She got away with $6,000. The only problem was she immediately goes out and takes a YouTube video, takes a video of herself with a sign, "I just robbed a bank. I stole a car too, and I got $6,000. I am rich," she says. Puts it up on YouTube. Well, a matter of 5 days later, the officers come and arrest her, and she was thinking she was having a great day. She told her mom that, "Mom, this has been the greatest day ever." Her mom just thought she met a new boyfriend. But again, don't let silliness and don't let bank robbery be part of your plan. I will do these things. How can I then? The answer is, how can I provide for others? God expects us to give back into His kingdom. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 6. Verse 18 says, "They are to do good." This is those that are rich in this world, it would lead in. "To be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. God would want you to work hard, yes. He provides for us, but He gives us these things so that we can give back to His kingdom, give back to His church, give back to His causes, and see more people come to know Jesus Christ. Let me quickly share 3 pieces of practical advice with you. This says in verse 20, "You fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you've prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." First of all, God will examine your soul and not your portfolio. Now, I hope you have a great portfolio. I hope you're invested. I hope God is blessing all of that. If so, that again, the money is not the problem. It's the love and the worship of money where that is the issue. So God's going to examine your soul. I told you earlier that Jesus died for your sin. Do you have that kind of relationship where you know without a shadow of doubt, if you were to stand before God today, He would say, "Well done"? I don't want you to die. I don't want any of you to die. But the fact and the reality is, at some point, every one of us will stand before God. And He's not going to look at how much you earned. He's going to look at, did you accept His Son, Jesus Christ? And so I have no better gift to give you than that gift, which is eternal life. And so if, again, nothing else happens from this message today, have you considered and understand who God's Son is? He's looking at your soul, not your portfolio. Secondly, be content with what He's provided. He's provided a lot of us. I would venture to say that many of us in this room have way more than that $10 bill I asked you to consider earlier. Many of us have all kinds of things that God has given us, all kinds of provision. But are we content with what He's given? 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6 says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." I like how Paul talks about this. He says, if I die, good. If I live, good. See, if I live, he says, I'm going to go on and keep serving here. If I die, I'm going to go immediately and be with God. And so he was content with whatever he had. He didn't necessarily have a whole lot. Jesus Christ, He didn't have a place to lay His head, the New Testament says. And yet He was content with filling God's will and doing God's will. So are you content with what you've been given? Again, it's not yours. A steward is one that manages somebody else's stuff. So that's God. That's how He's given to us. He is asking us to be good stewards and managers of all these things that we've been given. And then finally, on this practical advice, are you living by a budget? I come back to that. We start with that and we end with that. Are you living by that budget? Are you making a plan for all these things that God has done for you and given to you? Or are we just saying, whatever happens, somehow I'll make it through? And some people live that way and do just fine. But I highly encourage you to examine what you've pinned down, examine what God has given you, find out, are you living faithfully for Him? Use wisdom. Use God's wisdom. He's given it to you for a purpose. There was a guy named James Marshall. In 1848, it was January the 24th, he's standing out back behind the mill where he worked, and he had a partner that had this mill, and they were making lumber and so forth. The river comes down. This is in California, just outside of Coloma, California. And so he's looking at this river. He's trying to figure out a way to widen this thing to make it turn more power for their sawmill. And he sees these flecks, these sparkling things come down the river. So he collects them up, figures out this is different. This is not just normal debris that's flowing through this river. And you know what he found? He found gold. He sparked, actually, the gold rush in California in 1848. He found this. He had this gold examined, and come to find out it was about 96% pure, these samples that he took. That's apparently 23 karat gold. I'm not a gold person. I'm just going off what I read from this story. Well, you would think, hey, that guy, he did really well for himself because he found this, sparked this whole movement of this gold thing, and he said to his partner, no, I think I'm going to keep working the mill. Well, within 4 years, the mill dries up. The mill doesn't turn a profit. 10 years later, he says, hey, what if we get into gold now? Well, it was too late. He made some poor decisions early on. And I'm not telling you that just because he would have started mining for gold earlier, that he would have been this rich whatever. No, he died. He lived in about a 10 by 15 cabin, and he was penniless. Now, I don't know if he was happy or not, but I do know he wished he'd made some different decisions early on. So I'm here to tell you today, it's not too late. God has blessed you, I feel that. God has given you a lot, but are we making wise decisions with what He's given? Now, I'm thankful that God blesses His church, especially when we take this into consideration. The more I can give, the more people can hear about Jesus Christ. Don't be unwise. I'm not asking you to go from zero to giving thousands of dollars. If you're at zero right now, I would say a goal would be to get to 10%, but maybe it needs to be in increments. Again, I'm just asking you in all of God's wisdom to figure out what He's wanting you to do with that wealth that He's given. So would you look within your heart? First of all, is Christ there? And then secondly, is God asking you to do something different financially? You're going to hear a round table next week, I know, and I'm thankful for that. God's already at work, though, and He's already blessing. He promises to take care of the birds. You know this from the New Testament? It says they don't sow and they don't spin, they don't reap. You've never seen a bird driving around on a tractor trying to dig for worms. He provides for them. And He says, how much more important then are you? God loves you, and He wants to take care of you. And He will. Will we give back, though, to Him and His kingdom?
Hey, thanks so much for listening to our podcast at First Baptist Joplin. If you are interested in coming and worshiping with us live, we would love for you to come at 9 and 10:30 on Sunday mornings.